Mark chapter 8, verses 31 through 38. Then Jesus began to teach his disciples, "The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and the legal experts, and be killed, and then after 3 days rise from the dead." He said this plainly, but Peter took hold of Jesus and scolded him, began to correct him. Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, then sternly corrected Peter. "Get behind me, Satan. You are not thinking God's thoughts, but human thoughts." After calling the crowd together with his disciples, Jesus said to them, "All who want to come after me must say to themselves, 'Take up their cross and follow me.' All who want to save their lives will lose them, but all who lose their lives because of me and because of the good news will save them. Why would people gain the whole world but lose their lives? What will people give in exchange for their lives? Whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this unfaithful and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of that person when he comes in the Father's glory." The Word of God for the people of God.
Hello, friends. Hello, Hamline Chapel. It is so great to be with you online today. Thanks for pulling up this video and joining us here for our recorded service for the second Sunday in Lent. So grateful that you're here. Hopefully you've been following along with us online through this season of Lent so far. We have been posting every single day on our Facebook page a daily devotional, and I hope that you found those helpful and that you're utilizing those. There's a scripture reading, a kind of devotional thought, and then a kind of action item step at the end of it that's been posted each day during the season of Lent. And I hope that you're finding those helpful and useful in your life. I've heard from several of you that they are, and if you haven't checked them out, go to our page and follow along with us throughout this season. But today we're going to jump right into this passage of scripture you heard read to us from the Gospel of Mark. And what a challenging passage that was read to us. And I want to start by just asking you the question, like, have you ever, and it's kind of an odd question and might make you feel a little bad at first, but have you ever been disappointed by Jesus? Or maybe the better question is, have you ever been disappointed by who you thought Jesus was? See, when I look around our faith communities, I see a lot of people that have had moments of disappointment in their understanding of who Jesus is and what he's like and what he's calling them to. And this passage that we jump into today is really a disciple of Jesus being disappointed and actually being angered at the fact that Jesus wasn't who he thought he was. He was disappointed. This isn't what I signed up for, almost is the response. I wonder if you have a moment in your faith journey where you've been stretched and you've been challenged and that you were following Jesus and some event happened. And you were just like, Jesus, I thought that things were supposed to go this way and they're going that way. Maybe it was a sickness that came over you or someone you loved or cared for. Maybe it was death of someone, a loss of someone that you loved or cared for, a family member, a friend. Maybe it was loss of a job, or maybe it was just like you were let down by someone that you thought was a follower of Jesus and someone you looked up to, and things just went, they maybe did something or said something, and it just really altered your understanding of who they were, and you questioned, Jesus, is this what a life of faith is about? Is this what happens to people that follow you? See, for many people, we've been sold this kind of idea that following Jesus makes your life sunshine and roses and rainbows and puppy dogs. When in reality, this life of faith that we're called to is learning to trust God and learning to grow closer to the divine during all that life really throws at us. That faith in our relationship with God and our trust in Jesus is something bigger than just follow these 4 easy steps and your life will be easy and perfect. And many people have been sold this idea that that's what following Jesus is like. Like it's just this little pill that we pop and all our troubles go away. And yet when we look at the scriptures and when we see, man, the people that have followed Jesus and we look at history and even in our own families and in our own faith community, we find that that's just not what a life of following Jesus really often looks like. And you might be thinking like, and for some people, they get these moments of disruption or these moments where their faith is shaken. And for some people, their faith crumbles and it can't handle that stretch or that challenge or that growth that needs to happen. There's all kinds of people that aren't following Jesus today and they once were because of some devastating thing that happened or something that shook and stretched their faith. And they were just like, this doesn't add up and this doesn't line up and I can't make sense of it. And so I'm just done with it all. Some people have had those moments that happen in their life and instead of just giving up on it, they just kind of dig in even deeper and say like, contrary to the world around me, like this is how faith should go and this is how I'm going to make up my mind that it's going to be. And they just kind of live in this bubble world that they've created for themselves. But for others, they take this deep dive in this step and they recognize that there's maybe this gap in who we think Jesus is. And that we had this understanding of who Jesus was, and maybe we didn't understand him correctly, or we didn't understand the life that he was calling us to accurately. And yet we say, Jesus, we want you to continue to correct us. We want you, Jesus, to rebuke us, to teach us, to continue to transform us, even when we get to these moments in our faith where we're like, that's not how I thought things should go. That's not what I was expecting. This gospel passage that we read today in Mark's gospel, it's one of those moments in the disciple Peter in his life. And it's kind of interesting where it comes because in Mark, we had just, if you read just a little bit before this passage that we look at today, Jesus asks his disciples, who do y'all say that I am? What's your understanding of me? Who do you think I am? Or who do people say that I am is really the question. And the disciples say, some people think you're John the Baptist. Some people think you're Elijah or you're like a prophet or something. And then Jesus turns the question around on him and he says, who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? And Peter responds in that moment and says, you are the Christ. Like you're the one that we've been expecting, waiting on, anticipating. You're the one. And like we in the church are like, like we celebrate Peter. Like he knew who Jesus was. He recognized it. And like, it's this beautiful moment, and it was. But then just a couple of verses after that, we get to what we read today. And we realize that Peter, he got the Sunday school answer right, and he knew what to say, and he had this idea. But then Jesus kind of points out, like, there's this gap in who you think I am and who I really am. And we jump into it in Mark chapter 8, and it says that Jesus, right after this, starts preaching and teaching this weird message that the Son of Man, which is what he refers to himself as, it's his title for himself, must suffer many things, be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, and then he must be killed, and then after 3 days, rise again. And Mark says he spoke plainly about this. He says this is what it's actually going to look like when you're following me. This is what path I'm journeying on. It says that Peter then took Jesus aside and he rebuked him. So a strong word that they use for what Peter did. It's like he confronts, he condemns, and he's expecting change. Peter confronts Jesus and says, hold up, this is not what I signed up for. I said you're the Christ. And when I said that you were the Christ, I had this expectation that you were going to come and put me in the seat of power, we find out later on in Mark, and that we were going to rule, and this was like this big power trip that we were going to be on, and people were going to come around us and celebrate us and all these great things. And Peter tells him, like, Jesus, you can't say those sorts of things. Like, that doesn't draw a crowd. Like, people don't want to hear that from you. They want to hear that, man, things are going to be great and they're going to go how you want them and everything's going to be perfect in your life. And Peter rebukes Jesus. The word rebuke in Mark, it's the same word that Jesus uses when he's casting out demons, that Peter is rebuking him. And maybe you've had one of those moments of faith in your life where quite frankly, you've rebuked Jesus and you've said, this is not what I signed up for. I didn't sign up for people to disappoint me. When I signed up, I didn't sign up for my kid to get sick. Jesus, when I said I'd follow you, like, I thought it was going to make things right. Like, I didn't expect I lost my job. Like, that's not supposed to happen. And we want to rebuke Jesus and call him out and say, hey, I'm confronting you because this isn't what I signed up for. This isn't how it's supposed to be. And you need to fix this and you need to make it right. And that's what Peter's doing in this passage. He's like, this is not what I signed up for, Jesus. And so if you've had those moments in your faith journey, if you've had those moments where you've kind of questioned and called out Jesus, like, what is going on? Why are things this way? I didn't expect this to happen. This isn't really what I signed up for. You're in good company with Peter today. And Peter's rebuking Jesus and calling him out, really. And then it says, Peter takes Jesus aside and he rebukes him. He says, but when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, Jesus rebuked Peter. Jesus confronts and he condemns and he expects change out of Peter. And he tells Peter, get behind me, Satan. Those are some strong words from Jesus to Peter. He says, like, what you're saying, what you're proposing, it's satanic. It's not from God. It's the opposite of what I'm intending. He says, you don't have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. You don't have in mind the things of God, but you have in mind the things of men. When we face these moments of crisis, these moments of brokenness, these moments when we're forced to confront, man, Jesus, you're not really what I expected. This isn't really what I signed up for. It's these moments where we really identify that, man, the thoughts and the idea of who you were, man, they're not really who you are. And Jesus confronts us with those beliefs. It's not like a fun, comfortable thing to talk about on a Sunday morning, right? That we want to be told, man, follow Jesus. Your life will be perfect. And this message that Jesus says, like, man, come with me. Like, we're going to suffer a lot of things. We're going to be rejected. Ultimately, we're going to be killed. But at the end, there's resurrection. And like what? Like, people are not going to follow us when you're preaching that message, Jesus. Jesus says, well, there's a gap in your understanding of who I am and what life is about and what we're called to do. And then Jesus even goes on to explain a little more to Peter after he rebukes him. It says, then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples, and he said, if anyone would come after me, if you're going to follow me, you must deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me and for the gospel will save it. Jesus calls him and he says, man, if you want to follow me, what it really means to follow me is to deny yourself. that it's not about you. And you have to take up your cross and you have to follow me. And we have this kind of romanticized understanding of the cross. Like I used to have t-shirts I saw as a kid growing up, like I'm cross-eyed, or we have cross emblems on our jewelry. We put them on our bumper stickers. People wear them on their clothes. We put them in our yards, And yet when Jesus says, take up your cross and follow me, his audience listening to him today would have known anyone they ever saw carrying a cross was on their way to die. They were on their way to lose their life. And Jesus says, follow me. Deny yourself. It's not about you. Take up your cross. Come follow me. That's the call of Jesus to the disciples that day. And it stretches their faith, and it stretches their understanding of who he is and the life that he's calling them to. I'm going to share just a little story with you that I learned just this week about someone in our own church that I think might be fitting and appropriate for what we're looking at today. Hamline Chapel, I'm kind of obsessed with the history of this place, and it's incredible, and it's pretty neat how much we have here to access and to learn about the people that have come before us and our faith here. But I stumbled this week, you might have seen on social media, there's a picture being shared around some local groups of our church. And on the front steps, there's a large group of men and one woman that are posed for a picture in front of our building. In front row center is a pastor of the church at the time. His name was Reverend Wilson. Reverend Wilson has the honor of being pastor of this church longer than anyone else in its history. He first moved to Lawrenceburg in 1909 with his wife and 2 kids. They're 16 years old and 29 years old. Within his first few months of living here, his son died. And then a few months later, in November 1909, his daughter died. Him and his wife moved to Lawrenceburg to pastor a church, to do God's work. And they're here, and both of their children die within their first few months here and just a few months apart from each other. And this week, as I sat in this room, this sanctuary that we have, I wonder the conversations that Reverend Wilson had with God in this room. Maybe on this very platform, one of these altar rails. And I wonder if he cried out, if he rebuked God in this place. Said, God, this isn't how things are supposed to go. I'm serving you. And the things most precious to me are gone. I wonder if his tears fell on the floor of this very room. And I wonder if it was a moment, this gap in his understanding of Jesus was revealed. Maybe I'm taking some liberty with what I have written. But I can only imagine that his faith was stretched in that moment. And for many of us, it had been sold that, man, bad things don't happen to people that follow Jesus. Something like that's the worst that could happen, and it rocks your faith. And I'm sure that he had this moment of wrestling with God and wrestling with his faith. And we find that he was only here for a couple of years, and then our records show that him and his wife moved away to get away from the place of their sorrow. I think it was just about 5 years later, we see that Reverend Wilson comes back to pastor this church. And that picture that you see is the fruit of his ministry. It's the fruit of his faithfulness in his relationship with Jesus as he comes back to the place of his sorrow and the place of his grief. And he ministers to the people here. Our records say that his Sunday school class that he taught while pastor of this church had between 50 to 100 people every single week. And the people were drawn to this church and were drawn to Jesus because of Reverend Wilson's faithfulness in following him. His faith had to have been stretched in that moment. His faith had to have been challenged, and he, I'm sure, was filled with questions and doubts and struggles. And yet he wrestled through it. And yet he worked through it. And he allowed Jesus to transform him as he began to learn maybe that life isn't about everything going perfectly. That following Jesus isn't a guarantee that there aren't going to be bumps and devastation and loss in the road. But that maybe following Jesus and our relationship to God, to the divine, goes beyond just my personal beliefs and comfort and what I want and how I expect things to go. And that God is working in and around us all the time, even when we don't see it, even when we don't know it, even when we don't understand it. He's calling us and he's stretching us. I'm so thankful that Reverend Wilson didn't turn his back on God in those moments. I'm so thankful that he didn't decide to just live in a bubble and say, well, you know, or make excuses or try to rationalize things, but that he embraced Jesus. And that he allowed Jesus to strengthen his faith and to transform him, even in the most devastating of circumstances. And he comes back, and there's 100 people on the front steps of our church that are drawn to Jesus, that are growing in their relationship with God because of a man that wrestled and allowed Jesus to shape and transform him. It's a pretty extreme and drastic story. But it points to some real realities in our life. That what do we do when Jesus doesn't really turn out to be who we expected him to be? How do we handle that? What do we do when Jesus isn't what we expected? Do we turn our backs? Do we just dig in where we're at? Or do we allow him to continue to correct us, to rebuke us, to teach us, to transform us? And so I hope this season of Lent, as you're following Jesus to the cross, and as you're wrestling with your own sin, maybe even your own doubts and your fears and your understandings, my hope and my prayer is that Jesus will continue to reveal himself to you, that you would be drawn deeper and deeper into relationship with him, that he would teach you, that he would correct you, that he would transform you and make you into the person that he desires you to be. Friends, it's okay for us to wrestle and to have these struggles with our faith. But let's allow Jesus to have the last word. Let's allow Jesus to shape us and to transform us. And friends, this season, I hope that you'll allow Jesus to transform you, allow him to shape you, and allow Jesus to make you into the person that he desires for you to be. As you deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow him.